Welcome to the debate. Imagine you're staring down a pile of bills you just can't pay. Like maybe it's a sudden medical expense or rent is due, and you're totally out of options.
Right. It's a deeply terrifying place to be.
It really is. So where do you go? You probably wouldn't think to, walk into a temple, find a towering, absolutely terrifying Lord of Demons, and offer him exactly 9 red roses.
No, I mean, that's not the typical financial plan.
Exactly. But across Thailand and Southeast Asia, that is exactly what millions of people are doing right now.
And it's a completely surreal scene if you don't really understand the context. We're talking about Thao Vessavana. In ancient Hindu origins, he's known as Kubera, but in the Buddhist traditions we're analyzing today, he's a yaksha. Basically, a massive, fearsome giant.
He really is intimidating.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at his statues, he's designed to inspire just absolute terror. He's glaring down at you with these bulging eyes, he's got protruding fangs, and he's leaning on this massive punishing club. Historically, this is the guy you pray to when you're terrified of malicious ghosts, right? He's the guardian of the North, the spiritual bouncer, keeping the horrors of the underworld at bay.
Right, he's the ultimate protector against the dark. But today, the temples are flooded with these highly specific offerings. It's not just people trembling in awe. It's 9 red roses. It's swatches of bright red cloth. It's sweet red drinks like strawberry Fanta just piled up at his feet.
Piles of it.
Yeah. And the people bringing these aren't asking for protection from wandering spirits. They are desperately begging this ancient demon lord for winning lottery numbers, for business success, for straight-up wealth.
It's a massive shift. And, well, it brings us to the core of what we're debating today. Are we looking at a tragedy of hyper-capitalism that's completely diluted a sacred myth? Or is this actually a profound reflection of how humans survive?
Exactly. And I'll be coming at this from the perspective of a cultural mythologist. I'll be arguing that humanity fundamentally needs an apex predator to protect us against unseen evils.
And I'll be taking the modern sociologist's view, arguing that modern worshippers are driven by sheer economic anxiety. They fear poverty far more than they fear ghosts.
So let's just dive right into the psychological necessity of this figure. I'd argue that human nature fundamentally requires what I call the gargoyle effect.
The gargoyle effect?
Yeah, it's this incredibly old, deeply ingrained human instinct to fight fire with fire. I mean, think about the historical context where a deity like a yaksha was formulated. The world was, frankly, an immensely dark, volatile, and hostile place. Human beings were completely at the mercy of unknown terrors.
Because they didn't have the science to explain it.
Right. We didn't have germ theory, so a plague or a sudden illness swept through a village like an invisible predator. The night was ruled by wild animals and, in the cultural imagination, malicious evil spirits. When you are standing on the edge of the jungle, confronting that level of absolute vulnerability, a benevolent, smiling God holding a lotus flower just isn't going to cut it.
Right. You don't send a golden retriever to guard a bank.
Precisely. You don't send a gentle shepherd to fight a pack of wolves. You need a monster to fight the monsters. You need the absolute boss of the demons to keep the lesser demons in line. That is the gargoyle effect.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. Human psychology requires an apex predator of the spirit world to serve as a hard boundary against total chaos. It brings a profound sense of psychological safety. You look at those fangs in that club and you think, okay, the things in the dark are scared of him. My core concern today is that this modern obsession with wealth and transaction entirely strips him of that existential gravity.
You think it dilutes his identity?
Severely. Thao Vessavana was meant to ward off death, illness, the collapse of cosmic order. When you shrink him down into a magical genie who grants you a lucky stock pick, you lose the ancient anchor our ancestors relied upon.
See, I hear that, but I think you're romanticizing the past and really underestimating the present.
How so?
Well, you're evaluating the modern worshiper through a lens that assumes their modern fears are somehow less existential or less valid than those of their ancestors. But if we look at the sociology of religion, Gods have to adapt to fit the actual, waking anxieties of the people praying to them. Or else, they just vanish into irrelevance.
So you're saying the fears have just shifted?
Exactly. Yes, 1,000 years ago, humans feared the tiger in the jungle, or the unexplained fever, or vengeful ghosts. But the jungle changed.
Right. The jungle became the city.
Exactly. We live in a concrete jungle now. The apex predators wandering around today aren't tigers or forest spirits. The apex predators are inflation. They are algorithmic layoffs. They are crippling household debt and an unexpected medical bill that can wipe out 3 generations of family savings in a day.
Which is terrifying, sure.
Right. So, Thao Vessavana's rebranding from the Lord of Demons to the Lord of the Economy isn't a dilution of the myth. It's an economic coping mechanism. It's a direct, brilliant mapping of an old guardian onto a completely new threat.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Doesn't the nature of the worship matter? The way they're doing it is so calculated.
But that's the coping mechanism. When you see a gig worker bringing exactly 9 red roses to beg for lottery numbers, I don't think you should see a greedy person asking for a luxury car. You should see a deeply anxious person grasping for any tiny semblance of control in a hyper-capitalist society that offers absolutely none.
So it's an act of desperation?
Completely. The modern economic system is arbitrary. It's ruthless. Honestly, it's fundamentally more terrifying than a giant with a club. They're praying to a monster because they're being hunted by a monstrous system.
Okay, the idea of inflation as an apex predator is a great visual, I'll give you that. But to understand why I push back on this, we really need to look at the mechanics of terror in Eastern mythology. It functions very differently than what you're describing.
Go on.
Asian mythology doesn't adhere to that strict Western good versus evil binary, where demons are universally evil and always fighting against the divine order. In Buddhist cosmology, things are much more complex. A terrifying demon-like entity can actually serve the Buddha. He can protect the Dharma, which is the cosmic law and the Buddhist teachings.
Right. He's intimidating, but he's on the payroll of the good guys.
Exactly. His menacing appearance has a vital, structural, spiritual function. It creates a hard boundary. The terror he inspires isn't just to scare away bad ghosts. It's supposed to shock the human mind into awareness.
Awareness of what exactly?
It turns your mind toward morality, toward right action, toward recognizing your own mortality. It's almost like a spiritual technology designed to snap you out of your petty, day-to-day greed. But when you look at the actual methods of modern worship we're discussing, well, they bypass this spiritual function completely.
I would argue they bypass it because immediate material needs have completely eclipsed abstract spiritual ones. You can't meditate on cosmic law when you can't feed your kids.
I'm not denying the reality of poverty, absolutely not. But look at the extreme mechanical nature of the ritual itself. These worshipers aren't meditating on the Dharma under his watch. They are bringing exactly 9 red roses. Not 8, not 10.
Right.
And they're offering red cloth in what is essentially a perfectly calculated exchange. It's a contract. They're inserting an offering and expecting a tangible monetary payout in the form of a winning lottery ticket. I mean, I'm sorry, but that resembles a celestial ATM far more than it resembles a spiritual boundary against chaos.
A celestial ATM?
Yes. When a ritual becomes that focused on a rigid input-output of capital, it stops being mythic. It just becomes an extension of the exact same capitalist system you're claiming they want refuge from.
A celestial ATM? That's a clever phrase, I'll admit, but I come at it from a different way. I think it misses the underlying psychology. Let me explain why.
Sure.
The precision of the ritual, the exact 9 roses, the specific red drinks, it's totally consistent with how marginalized people have always interacted with overwhelming, arbitrary systems. Think about it. When a system feels entirely chaotic, like the modern economy, where a sudden market crash halfway across the world can cost you your job tomorrow, people crave rules.
So the specific number of roses is an attempt to create rules where there are none?
Yes, The hyperspecificity of the offering is an attempt to impose order on economic chaos. You call it a celestial ATM, but an ATM implies a guaranteed withdrawal. You put your PIN in, you get 20 bucks.
Fair point.
That's not what's happening here. This is closer to a celestial collective bargaining agreement.
A collective bargaining agreement with a demon?
Exactly. They are bringing the exact right items, following the exact right steps, because they are desperately trying to follow the rules of a universe that seems to have stopped playing by any rules at all. They are negotiating for survival.
Okay. I love the collective bargaining analogy, but wait, let me pose a rhetorical question here. If they just want a celestial ATM or even a collective bargaining agreement to cope with financial anxiety, why choose the scariest god in the entire temple?
What do you mean?
Well, think about the pantheon for a second. There are plenty of deities of wealth. There are gods of prosperity, agriculture, commerce, who are historically associated with smiling benevolence, overflowing pots of gold, and abundance. Why bypass them entirely? Doesn't the specific choice of a fierce, fanged giant to guard your finances suggest something a bit deeper?
What do you think it suggests?
To me, it suggests that we still subconsciously view the world, and specifically the economy, as a deeply hostile, violent place that requires an aggressive, violent defender. We aren't just politely asking a smiling god for a bit of extra money. We are asking a monster to violently protect us from the unseen forces that are trying to strip us of our livelihoods.
So back to the bouncer.
Exactly. It's exactly the gargoyle effect I mentioned earlier, just wearing an economic mask. They want the bouncer with the club because they feel under attack.
That's a really strong point, the desire for the bouncer. But consider this. Maybe the violence of his image is exactly the point, not because they subconsciously want a spiritual guardian, but because they consciously recognize the violence of poverty.
The violence of poverty.
Yes, poverty is violent. Eviction is a violent act. Starvation is a violent act on the human body. Those smiling gods of abundance you just mentioned, they belong to an agrarian past. In an agricultural society, wealth meant a good harvest. And a good harvest is cooperative. It requires rain, sun, patience, working with the community.
Right, it's a passive natural accumulation.
Exactly. But modern wealth is not a harvest. It's highly competitive, it's extracted. To survive in a hyper-capitalist structure, people feel they need a god capable of wielding a weapon against the structural forces crushing them. You don't want a god of rain and sunshine when you're dealing with a predatory lender. You want the guy with the club.
It's a dark way to look at it, but I see your logic.
This is how mythology naturally evolves. Transforming an ancient guardian of the underworld into an economic savior is the exact mechanism that keeps these ancient figures culturally relevant and alive in the 21st century. If Thao Vessavana hadn't been adapted to address the most pressing fear of the modern era, which is economic ruin, he'd be relegated to a museum.
You think he'd just fade away?
He'd just be a footnote in theological history. Instead, his courtyards are packed. The myth is a living, breathing reflection of human survival.
Culturally relevant is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. I'm just not convinced that commercialization equals cultural survival. Just because a temple courtyard is packed with people holding red Fanta doesn't mean the sacredness of the mythos has survived. I'd call it something closer to spiritual gentrification.
Spiritual gentrification? That's a strong claim. How so?
Well, think about what gentrification does. It keeps the cool, historic brick facade of a building, but it completely guts the inside and replaces it with a trendy coffee shop. That's what's happening here. The outward aesthetic of the deity remains. The fangs, the club, the bulging eyes, but the internal architecture of meaning has been completely gutted.
Gutted how?
It's been replaced with the very materialistic obsession he was originally meant to transcend. I mean, taking an entity designed to confront our mortality, to protect the sacred teachings of the Buddha, to stand as a bulwark against the infinite dark, and reducing him to a tool to get a better return on investment, it hollows out the myth.
I disagree that it hollows it out.
But it disrespects the psychological comfort our ancestors found in having a guardian of the dark. When we turn the Lord of Demons into a stockbroker, we lose the vocabulary to deal with actual existential dread, with death, with moral decay. We trade the truly sacred for the completely mundane.
That's a compelling argument, but spiritual gentrification, while it's a fascinating phrase, I think it fundamentally misunderstands what it means to be poor.
Okay, explain that.
You keep drawing this hard line between actual existential dread and economic anxiety, as if they occupy two totally different spheres of human experience. But for a worker struggling to keep the lights on, systemic poverty is not mundane. It's not a trendy coffee shop. It is the most terrifying, all-encompassing force in their universe. Let me ask you, what constitutes unseen evils today?
Well, traditionally, it would be the spiritual forces of chaos, the realities of death, the impermanence of life.
Right. In the ancient world, an unseen evil was a spirit that brought a fever. But today, an unseen evil is a fluctuating interest rate. It's an inflationary spike that quietly halves the purchasing power of your wage while you sleep. These are invisible, untouchable forces that destroy lives from afar. How is that not the modern equivalent of an unseen demon?
It's a modern demon, sure.
Exactly. So to say that adapting a guardian deity to fight these specific modern demons is hollowing out the myth is honestly denying the lived reality of the worshippers. The sacred hasn't been destroyed or gentrified, it's been weaponized for survival.
I hear you. And I certainly don't want to minimize the suffering that economic anxiety causes. It is a profoundly destructive force. But a myth has to offer something beyond mere survival to remain sacred, doesn't it? If Thao Vessavana merely becomes a mirror for our capitalist desperation, then he stops offering an alternative way of viewing the world.
An alternative way?
Yes. The beauty of the original mythology is that it situates human life within a cosmic order. The demons are kept at bay so that the human being can pursue enlightenment, so that they can cultivate virtue and understand the Dharma. The physical protection has a higher spiritual purpose.
I don't disagree with the original intent.
But the terrifying face of the yaksha is meant to shock you out of your worldly attachments. To take that exact terrifying face and use it to beg for the absolute peak of worldly attachment, lottery wealth, is a fundamental inversion of how the myth is supposed to work.
That only holds up if you assume that the request for wealth is born purely out of greed, rather than a desperate need for security. You look at those 9 red roses and you see petty, worldly attachment. I look at those same roses and I see someone trying to buy a shield.
A shield against poverty?
Yes. You said the terrifying visage of Thao Vessavana is supposed to shock the viewer out of worldly attachment so they can pursue enlightenment. But you cannot pursue enlightenment when you are starving. You cannot sit and peacefully meditate on cosmic law when you are terrified the bank is going to take your house tomorrow.
Well, basic psychology.
Exactly. The hierarchy of needs dictates that physical and economic security has to precede spiritual self-actualization. The worshippers aren't inverting the myth. They are using the deity to secure the baseline survival they need to even participate in that cosmic order you're describing.
But by leaning so heavily into the transactional nature of it, the vending machine logic, they are reinforcing the very system that creates their vulnerability in the first place. Think about the psychological mechanism here. If you start believing the universe operates like a capitalist transaction, 9 red roses in, winning lottery numbers out, you are internalizing the logic of hyper-capitalism and projecting it onto the divine.
You think it traps them?
Yes, you lose the profound psychological release that comes from genuine faith. The traditional worship of the apex predator involved surrendering to the mystery of the dark. It meant trusting that the guardian with the club would keep the true horrors at bay, even if you didn't understand how. It required humility.
Right.
The modern ritual, with its exact numbers and specific colors, is an attempt to control the outcome. It's not devotion. It's a demand disguised as devotion.
I think we have to be incredibly careful not to romanticize the terror of the ancient world. You speak of surrendering to the mystery of the dark and genuine faith. But let's be real, our ancestors were not engaged in high-minded, peaceful spiritual surrender every time they made an offering to a frightening deity.
Well, no, they were terrified.
Exactly. They were terrified of their crops failing, they were terrified of their children dying of cholera, and because of that terror, they were engaging in their own forms of highly transactional worship. They were sacrificing animals, burning crops, offering whatever scarce resources they had to appease the spirits.
The transaction isn't some modern hyper-capitalist invention. It is literally the oldest form of human bargaining. We have always tried to bribe the terrifying forces of the universe.
So you're saying the core behavior hasn't changed at all?
Not fundamentally. The only difference now is the currency and the specific nature of the threat. The ancient villager offered rice and blood to keep the cholera away. The modern gig worker offers red roses and strawberry Fanta to keep the debt collectors away. The sociological mechanism, which is bargaining with a terrifying power to survive a terrifying world, is identical.
All concede that transactional religion isn't exclusively a modern phenomenon. Humans have always bargained. However, the scale and the hyper-commercialization we see today fundamentally alter the psychological landscape.
In what way?
When Thao Vessavana is mass-marketed as the lord of the economy, when you have his image stamped on amulets that are explicitly sold and traded for their speculative financial return, the myth becomes entirely subsumed by the market. He is no longer an entity outside the system offering protection from it. He has literally become a product within the system.
I see what you're saying.
And that's where I stand my ground to conclude my points. Humanity desperately needs psychological anchors that exist outside the logic of commerce. Thao Vessavana's true significance lies in its ancient fearsome role. He represents an apex predator of the psyche, a figure capable of absorbing our deepest existential terrors, our fear of death, our fear of chaos, the literal unseen dark. When we obscure that ancient function beneath a mountain of red roses and lottery tickets, we lose a vital tool for navigating what it actually means to be human.
And my position remains that you simply cannot separate what it means to be human from the material conditions in which humans are forced to live. The modern manifestation of Thao Vessavana as a wealth granter is probably the most poignant sociological indicator of our time.
It's certainly a strong indicator.
It proves that the oldest myths don't die. They are just continually resurrected and retrofitted to fight the newest wars. His transformation from a ghost hunter to a debt fighter demonstrates how deeply economic anxiety permeates every single facet of modern life. It's so pervasive that it has colonized the divine. Humans will always adapt their oldest guardians to cope with their newest fears. It's not a loss of the sacred. It's a testament to human resilience. It's a desperate, creative strategy to find hope and protection in an economic system that often feels as merciless and bloodthirsty as any ancient demon.
It's clear that we've arrived at a point of convergence, even if we took completely opposite paths to get here. I think we both agree that Thao Vessavana, with his fangs and his massive club, serves as an incredibly powerful mirror for humanity's absolute deepest fears. He is a reflection of the violence we believe we need on our side to survive in a hostile world.
Precisely. The remaining tension between our perspectives lies only in how we define those core fears. Are they fundamentally spiritual, like a dread of chaos, impermanence, and mortality? Or are they fundamentally economic, a dread of systemic ruin, eviction, and poverty? Both forces are invisible, and both forces are entirely devastating.
Which leaves us with so much more to explore within this mythology. It forces us to continuously examine how we construct the guardians we believe will save us. So the next time you find yourself standing in the heavy, incense-thick air of a temple, looking up into the bulging eyes of a towering demon lord, consider what it is you are truly asking him to smash with that club. Is it the darkness of the underworld or the darkness of our own creation?